Hello gang, Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I've got quite a collection of true cryptid encounters and unexplained stories that I'm really excited to share with you. But before we get started, if you enjoy this kind of content, then do me a favor. Hit the like button, then subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. And then grab your boots because it's time to ride. First up tonight, a strange, unidentified entity is observed on a Cedar Lake, Indiana farm.
Hey biker, I wanted to reach out to you from Cedar Lake, Indiana, about an incident that I had which, has left me and my kids quite rattled. Something really shocking happened to me very late on the 30th of October this year, when I realized that I forgot to turn a light off in the barn while I was taking my dog out one last time. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was making sure that she finished before I put her inside to go out to the barn, since we do have a lot of coyotes here. I went around the corner of my house with the dog on a leash. It's basically pitch black besides the glow from a light in my daughter's room from her hermit crab tank. From what I could see, below her room is a walkout basement with a small driveway with hills on either side of it. The dog and I were just standing, facing that direction about 20 feet before the first hill goes down into the walkout. That's when I felt an icy cold feeling, and not from the weather. It was windy, and I stopped walking because I sensed that something was around. The dog started to bark in a very high-pitched way, and then growled between while trying to drag me towards the hill. I was trying to see, but my brain just wasn't making sense of what I was looking at. At first, I thought maybe a deer was standing on the hill. I could see an outline of something whitish and opaque, but dull due to the lighting. I looked to adjust my eyes since I could plainly make out the window clearly. The area that I was trying to focus on began to look like static from an old TV. I thought maybe the street light from afar was giving off some sort of whitish light. And then I remembered that we had 2 street lights on our driveway turned off about a month ago, because my husband was going to install his own. That's when I see this thing grow into something tall, lanky, and super skinny. It didn't have a face at all. No face. It had long, darker things like flowing clothes or hair or something that was moving or flapping in the wind. It's kind of hard to explain. I couldn't tell at first if it was standing on the opposite side of the hill or if it was in the driveway, until it rose to the size of the window, which would have been about the 2nd story. Just looking at it, I felt so sick to my stomach. It turned its head, and all I could see was static-like darkness. I almost did a backflip with the dog back onto the deck and ran inside. I had to drag that dog with me. I was terrified of what I saw. All that I could feel was ice cold and nausea. I got back inside and just leaned on the wall because my heart felt like it was going to fly out of my chest. My son was in the kitchen, and I told him what happened after I could talk. I honestly couldn't believe what I saw, and in my time, I've seen a lot of stuff. Once I could find my voice, I asked my son if he would please drive with me to the barn because I just saw something and didn't believe what I saw. I was afraid at that point to go alone. I explained what it was, and he said that he believes it may have been some kind of shape-shifting thing. Now, I'm not very well versed in that sort of stuff. I've seen many things paranormal, but this sucker took the cake. I can't to this day get over what I visually saw before me. Anyways, my son and I got into the car right away from the front of the house. I live on a 20-acre farm. To go drive back around the barn. We really looked around to see if we could find it again, but we didn't, and we haven't seen it since. Thanks for letting me share. Signed, Bobby.
Strange and more than a bit disturbing, Bobby. I really appreciate you sharing. Next, way back in the 1970s, a truck driver had 2 separate experiences in which he believed that he encountered a cryptid in rural Pennsylvania.
Hello, Tattooed Biker. My dad drove a truck during the 1970s oil embargo. One night he broke down in rural Pennsylvania, several miles north of Williamsport. He had to walk down the highway a few miles back to a restaurant where he could use the phone and call dispatch. After the phone call, he walked back to the truck. There was no moon, and because of the oil embargo, the highway was pretty deserted. From the tree line on the side of the highway came the crack of an enormous tree branch breaking, and then some movement. My dad stopped and called out. He thought it might be someone fooling around, or maybe a hunter out in the woods. Odd as that would have been at that time of night. No answer came from the trees, and my dad continued toward his busted rig. But all the way to the truck, he was sure that he heard something following him in the tree line, matching his own footsteps. He locked himself in the cab of the truck and waited, eventually, until help arrived. Another night, again in 1970s, this time in north-central Pennsylvania in the mountains. A strange figure ran out in front of my dad's truck. It looked to my dad, who hadn't heard of Bigfoot yet, like a man in a gorilla costume. When he arrived at his destination, he told some of the men working there what he had seen, and asked if any of them had ever seen a guy in a gorilla costume running around on the mountain roads. They all thought my dad was nuts. Well, those are my dad's two experiences with what he believes was Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. Thanks. Signed, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. A great share. And now a witness describes their harrowing encounter with a strange entity while walking on a trail during the winter.
Dear TB, this happened to me 8 years ago during my senior year of high school. One day I decided to duck out of school early and walk in the woods by myself during the winter. As a usual teenager and a free soul, I didn't care about anything. I was sort of fog-brained, if you all know what I mean. So I skipped out at 11 a.m. and went for a walk. And when I did, I walked all over the woods, just enjoying the views and breathing in the beautiful, crisp, cold air. But then I walked up a trail that curved around in kind of a circle, with some thick bushes blocking the middle a little bit. When all of a sudden I heard leaves and snow crunching on the other side of these pine bushes. I can still see what's on the other side. The bush's leaves were like brush bristles, so I stopped and I froze, and my heart started pounding because, well, I knew that no one was nearby. But then I heard the leaves getting crunched, and they were pacing faster the closer they got. At this point, I started to kind of get tunnel vision. My fight-or-flight response kicked in because, well, I saw the prints being formed in the snow right in front of me, and the leaves and debris kicking up behind the steps. I ran, and whatever it was quickly began following me. And I ran as if my life depended on it, and I eventually came to an open area on the trail and looked behind me, and saw that nothing or no one was there. I'll never forget that incident to this day, and I'll never forget how I heard the steps but still saw nothing. But when my brain processed that there was something, though I couldn't make it out, I just shut down and I panicked and ran. I've told this story only a few times, but since that day I've read about and consumed as much paranormal stuff as I could find. I've read about gnomes and demons and angels, UFOs, spirits, and more. And I've even had a few other experiences since that day. I know this might sound weird, but it makes me happy that when I read about or listen to other people's strange and unexplained experiences, it makes me feel better because, well, I know I'm not crazy. And I know I'm not the only one that has seen things like these. Thanks for reading. Signed, Anonymous.
Fascinating story, and thank you so much for sharing that report. Now, this last one isn't an email because, you see, back in the spring of 2019, I put my camping hammock and bedroll in my saddlebags, threw on a backpack with the bare necessities, and then saddled up for a solo ride from here near Gettysburg to the southernmost point in the Florida Keys. My particular route was avoiding boring interstate travel where possible, and it was to take me down the Appalachian Mountains, around a 2,000-mile trip, and then back up along the coastline, which mapped out to around 1,900 miles. Along the way, I like to ask people I meet about anything unexplained they had seen or encountered, hoping to one day write a book with a compilation of these stories. One of these tales was told to me on that particular trip by a lovely young woman named Jackie while at a vegetable stand near Clewiston, Florida. She and I sat and talked a while under a canvas canopy while I took refuge during an afternoon thunderstorm. She allowed me to record her tale on my phone's audio recorder, and upon returning, I transcribed that recording into text and then saved it into my hard drive. So I've decided, since the eventual book is on a back burner, this seems like a good place to share Jackie's story.
I was 17, and it was during a holiday break from school. One morning, I was lying in bed watching my TV, and my mother walked in and said that we were going to go canoeing on the Kissimmee River, and my aunt and cousin were coming along with us. I quickly got out of bed, and we all headed out. When we got there, there was hardly anyone there, and it was very breezy and a bit colder than usual. It took my aunt and cousin almost 30 minutes to arrive. We grabbed 2 canoes from one of the rental places. My aunt, cousin, and I got in one canoe and were pushed off the shore first. My mom, dad, and sister were behind. Once they were in the water, we all started paddling. We had been on the water for about an hour, just enjoying the scenery and our time together, when I spotted something moving in the water. I looked down into the water and I saw a human figure swimming beneath us. The water was extremely shallow, and the figure moved in and out of the mangroves and weeds effortlessly. I looked closely and noticed that it was a young boy in his early teens with long blonde hair. I gasped in shock and fear as my family heard me and showed concern. The boy looked at me with these piercing red eyes, and I sensed evil and sadness. Upon seeing me, the boy turned his head and swam away into the deeper water. Once I had realized what had just happened, it's that my family was around me. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" they asked. I just nodded my head, saying I was fine. When I finally gathered my senses, I thought that maybe I saw something else in the water, but it still scared me. "It was nothing," I replied. My mom just said okay, and then we all continued with our sightseeing. But only a few minutes had passed when something else occurred. I was looking all around, enjoying the scenery, when I saw the boy again. This time, I focused my eyes through the layers of thick mangrove trees, and I could see the boy staring back at me with a scowling and angry face. His large, bright red eyes were glaring at me. I immediately got the feeling that we had passed through his territory and that we needed to get out of there as soon as possible. We had entered an open area of the river, but I was still focused on the boy in the mangrove. The wind started to pick up quickly, and the temperature started to drop. My cousin was standing, taking a video of the area with her video camera. My aunt was holding her legs from behind. As I continued staring at the boy, the wind got worse, and the boat tipped slightly, and my cousin lost her balance, falling into the water. I quickly looked away from the boy as I watched my cousin tumble into the water. I stood and reached out my arm to her. Then I remembered the boy and his evil expression. I looked back at the mangrove where I'd seen him standing, and he wasn't there. I panicked. I needed to reach my cousin as soon as possible and pull her back into the boat. The boy was gone, and I feared that he would do harm to my cousin. She was desperately trying to grab my and my aunt's hands to get back out, and I was screaming loudly, get out of the water." She finally reached my hand, and I quickly pulled her back onto the boat. She was fine, but I was shaking and more upset than she was. After a few minutes, I told everyone that I wanted to go back, that I was worried for the remainder of our time on the water. When we finally got back to shore, I just happened to spot the boy again as he rose up in the low-hanging mangrove. He gave me this hideous wink and rolled his eyes as he faded away. It made me shudder in horror. Suddenly I heard, "Ouch, my back hurts." My cousin was in pain and yelled out, just as the boy faded away. I lifted her shirt, and to everyone's shock, her entire back was huge black and blue bruises. Everywhere you looked on her back, she had dark marks. "I don't even remember getting hurt," she said. "You must have hit a stump under the water or something," I told her, while I knew full well that the boy had something to do with it. My aunt was emotionally beside herself and insisted we go to the hospital so my cousin could be treated. Several years later, I returned to the canoe rental place. It was now a bait and tackle store with docks. I asked some of the men working on a boat motor about the history of the place, after telling them about my previous experience. They told me that many years ago, a boy in his teens was playing around with his friends in the same area where my family and I were canoeing. One of his friends placed a bet with him about who could hold their breath the longest. The boy was from a poor family and wanted the money desperately. After they competed, the friend noticed that his friend was floating face down. When he touched him to tell him that he had won, there was no reaction. He quickly pulled him out of the water and then went to get help. That poor boy had wanted the money so badly that he had drowned in an attempt to hold his breath longer than his friend. When his parents learned of their son's death, they were so distraught that both committed suicide before the boy was buried. No one knew whatever happened to the boy's body. I walked towards the docks and looked out over the thick mangroves, and there he was. I clearly saw him standing there with his long blonde hair looking at me, this time with sorrow on his face. And this time he had light blue eyes. I smiled at him and then waved and turned to walk away, quickly glancing back in his direction. The boy was gone, but in my heart I knew that he'd be there forever.
And there it is. All the true and unexplained experience stories and cryptid reports that I have for you this evening. So what did you think about these? Be sure and leave your thoughts and theories down in the comments below, but please keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have a strange experience or an unexplained encounter that you'd like to share, just send it to the email address in the description, and well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for riding with me tonight. I really appreciate you. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.